A new era is upon us. Tangent PropTech unites founders, real estate and VC investors, urban leaders, and passionate creators who are improving our communities and cities. Join venture capitalists Jeffrey Berman and Zach Aarons and PropTech entrepreneur Edward Cohen, that's me, to learn about housing innovation, the future of work, and climate tech. We examine these themes through interviews and conversations with PropTech CEOs, real estate owners and operators, and venture investors, and how we can leverage tech and collaboration to help solve the housing crisis, figure out the future of work, and how to decarbonize the built environment. If you would like to get your company's or organization's mission featured on Tangent, email us at tangentcommunity@gmail.com. Hi, I'm Edward Cohen. Welcome to Tangent.
Hey there, this is Jeffrey Berman, and it's going to get tangential.
Today on Tangent, we have Frederik Hendriksen, co-founder of Rensair, cutting carbon, costs, and pollutants with the world's first certified air quality system. Hi, Frederik. Himimpoa mo fine ten podcastai.
That almost sounded like Danish.
That sounded more like Japanese to me.
No, I got some gist of where you were trying to go, but we could do a lesson later. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Where does this podcast find you?
I'm in New York City right now, where I live. I'm based out of Rensair as a business. We are headquartered in London, as we heard earlier, originally from Denmark, but been here in New York now for the past 3 years.
Wonderful. Let's get started, Frederik. You started Rensair with your twin brother in 2020, so we're not really sure if today we have you or your twin brother, but we're equally as happy. The technology, though, that you're working with dates back to your father's work in hospitals. So what's the origin story?
The core technology that we use today is really technology I grew up with. So my father is a ventilation engineer, and he developed a standalone device that you could put in operating rooms in Scandinavian hospitals back around 20 years ago. And essentially what the product does is it replicates the way that you would clean the air leading into an operating room. You can then deploy that device in any type of spaces to get that same level of cleanliness in the air. The reason why I mentioned that it was first deployed in operating rooms was that was really the first adoption, right? Typically, in many healthcare institutions, they realize over time that their systems don't perform the way they would like them to, and they end up having to do upgrades or add-ons to make them perform, and the technology was really utilized there. So I grew up with this. Both my twin brother and I, we have backgrounds in finance, and we worked with startups across the world, spent a bit of time in Asia and Africa and the UK. And then when the global pandemic started, we sat locked up in our apartments in London, and we started talking about there had been a fundamental shift in how people were thinking about clean air. And that was an interesting opportunity for taking the technology that our dad had developed originally for a pretty specialized issue in hospitals and see how that could be applied more broadly. That led us to start Rensair. In the meantime, our father had retired, so the tech was sitting idle. So we essentially started under a new name, Rensair. We were able to take out some new IP for the core tech, and that's the basis for where we are today.
Fascinating. A true origin story can't be replicated like that.
Should also say one of the reasons why my dad developed this product as a standalone device was actually because my twin brother had pretty severe asthma growing up. So the very first prototype sat in his bedroom. So when I'm talking about growing up with this tech, I'm literally talking about growing up with it. So, I don't have an engineering background. I have a finance background, but I've been so close to it my entire life that I feel like I have a very good understanding. And luckily, you can then hire the engineers in, and we have a great engineering team for that further development we've done.
When I met Frederik, I guess it was in Vegas, right?
Yeah.
And he was telling me the story. Normally you hear necessity is the mother of all invention, but in this case, necessity was the father of the invention.
Correct. Yes.
You got HVAC hacked. That's your slogan. So, let's talk about air quality and real estate. I mean, the conversation around indoor air quality has shifted post-pandemic. So tell us, what's changed in the way building owners and operators think about it?
Well, the reason why we chose HVAC hacked is really we're taking a new approach to how you do HVAC in buildings. And we believe that it's an industry that has seen very little innovation over the past many years and is in many ways quite archaic. And the reason for that, there are a number of reasons that we can touch on. But historically, the way that you have looked at HVAC is as you build a building, you put some large air handling units typically on the roof, and they supply air throughout the building. And the way, if you look at regulation, whether that be here in the United States or in Europe, etc., ventilation guidelines were really established to dilute indoor pollutants, so pull a lot of outside air into the building to dilute any indoor pollutants, and of course also achieve thermal comfort for people inside. The problem with that is just that that's very energy intensive. You pull a lot of air in from the outside and send it through a building, and you need to condition it to heat it up or cool down. That requires a lot of energy, which also means that the HVAC portion of a building's energy use typically accounts for 40%. And that's where we found a good way to, with our hardware and software, do a simple retrofit in a building and reduce that substantially.
That's critical. Let's hone in that. So HVAC accounts for 40% of a building's energy consumption. So how is Rensair helping clients reduce that by 40%, you said?
So we are typically able to reduce that 40% by 40%. And the way we do that is essentially, as I was alluding to, the traditional HVAC is expensive because you rely on this dilution concept. We, in a simplified way, rather than relying on pulling outside air in, we circulate, filter, and clean the air that's already inside the building, that's already near the target temperature you want. And through our hardware that we spread throughout the building, we can deliver a clean cubic foot of air at, on average, 9 times less energy consumption than pulling the air in from the outside. And that means that we essentially do a rebalance of the system. We can do a partial reduction of how much outside air to pull into the building. Instead, we introduce this new source of clean air that's through our hardware. And that's how we achieve this 40% energy reduction.
Fascinating. 40% seems to be the most famous number in climate tech. I mean, is it 40% of global carbon emissions is generated by commercial real estate? HVAC accounts for 40% of a building's energy consumption. And now Rensair can help clients reduce their cost by 40%. So
no, it's funny, right? Like, again, prior to this, right? Like, I didn't have a background in real estate or prop tech. And as you say, it's the number 40 that shows up everywhere for whatever reason. And we were not really aware until we did our first building installations. The very first places we tested was, for instance, the University College Cork in Ireland. And we saw the numbers we were achieving and we predicted what we would achieve. And it typically comes out at 40%.
Wow. Jeff, curious to hear your thoughts, not only your LPs, but, properties you're involved with. How significant is cutting costs when it comes to operations these days, and specifically energy consumption? Because there can be regulations that may move the needle or may force property owners and operators to act and to improve how their buildings are run. But in this case, there seems to be an ROI off the bat.
It depends on whether or not the lease is a triple net lease or a full service lease. If it's a full service lease and the landlord's paying, I think there's great motivation for them to reduce costs wherever they can. If it's triple net, then it's really up to the tenant. So I would say it depends on the structure of the lease. But in general, folks want to cut costs. I don't think that's a news flash.
Maybe just to add to that, if I can. So I think importantly, what we deliver to our clients are 3 things. So it's one, of course, it's the reduced energy consumption. And to Jeff's point, that depending on the building setup, it's either the tenant or the building owner that achieves that reduction. The way we deliver our savings is by reducing the amount of electricity and gas that's consumed to ventilate the building. That means you reduce carbon emissions by an amount by doing so. So we reduce energy costs, we reduce carbon emissions, but importantly also, we do it while we can demonstrate that we improve the indoor air quality in the building. So typically when you're looking at reducing energy consumption, it's at the cost of something else, right? Like you're accepting you're slightly worse off in some other way. Importantly, because we use our healthcare technology to clean the air in a building, we measure and demonstrate continuously that we can deliver a cleaner indoor environment than before. So we also improve the indoor environment for our clients.
Fascinating. So not only operational efficiencies, but also enhancing the tenant experience. Have you shown, or could owners prove that they can charge higher rents by having more efficient systems and better air quality?
That's a discussion we're having right now with one of the larger building owners in Europe. But I think also returning to Jeff's point before, where we have seen the most adoption to date is actually more with large tenants in buildings, so large occupiers. So we work with the likes of Salesforce, PwC. We're starting a new large project with Accenture. And it's actually in buildings where they are tenants, because what they like about our tech is our hardware is not built into the ducts. It's standalone devices that sit on the tenant floors, meaning we can introduce our hardware from a software link. We can connect it to the building management system. If you want to do that, it's not a necessity to achieve our efficiencies. And then we will coordinate some setting changes of the central HVAC system with the landlord. So the landlord can, in some cases where, for instance, with the triple net lease, where the tenant is paying for the energy bill, the tenant buys the solution. They see the reduction in their energy bills, but the landlord also achieves they're interested in doing it because all of a sudden they can reduce the running of their central system. That reduces wear and tear, but it also reduces the carbon emissions of the building, which again matters for reporting, for instance, here in New York City with Local Law 97, et cetera. And, those regulatory pressures are much, much more prevalent in Europe at the moment, right? So there we are really seeing, with the names I've mentioned here of our customers, that's really in Europe where that is leading that. Here in the United States, we are working with some large building owners that themselves are paying their energy bills. For instance, the largest owner of senior living. And here it's them that are doing the investment because they get the benefit from the reduced energy consumption.
Senior living sounds like a prime type of asset that should care more than the average real estate owner in terms of air quality and also cost, because it's highly operational, more intensive than others.
Exactly. Yes. It's a very clear value proposition to be able to, tell the operators and the residents in these spaces that they're getting cleaner air while the building is being run in a more efficient way for the owner.
Super cool. Let's talk about the technology itself, because you have the hardware and the software components, right?
As I mentioned, so we are using the same core technology that my dad developed. That is really, you could think of it as it's a standalone device that pulls in air and moves it through a number of filtration stages and then circulates it in a space. You could think of it really as like a high-end air purifier that was developed for an operating room. And it's that device, each device covers around 2,000 square feet. Those devices we've now IoT enabled. So via cellular, we transmit data to our cloud platform. So we have full management of all devices, but also each device at its air intake has a full built-in air quality sensor suite. So we detect air quality real time from each device. And that means that we create through our Rensair cloud platform, full fleet management. We can control, program the devices for how we want them to run, how we want them to change to changing environments. So let's say we measure high particulate matter levels. We can have the devices turn on if they're idle or run on a higher setting. But importantly, also, we are getting every 10 minutes an air quality data point for all the key parameters of air quality. And that gives us a very, very good understanding of the air quality in the building. And importantly, our hardware can affect the air quality. So we don't just, there are other sensor solutions only out there that measure air quality in the buildings and will, to some extent, be able to optimize airflow rates based on that. We go a step further and actually use our hardware to control that air. So the answer isn't just, let's send more outside air through the building or recirculate air through the central system. We are relying on our localized hardware to address it.
Support for this episode comes from Market Stadium. How should you choose the next real estate market to invest in? Should you keep investing in the same metro area? Will Las Vegas, Buffalo, and Charlotte live up to the hype? These are some of the fundamental questions multifamily and single-family investors are thinking about. That's where Market Stadium comes in. Market Stadium is your one-stop real estate data platform that optimizes every process of multifamily and single-family market analysis. Market Stadium helps accelerate 4 essential steps in the real estate investment process, including macro market selection, initial market screening, deep dive location analysis, and investment presentation. Their platform also helps real estate investors understand how markets have performed until now and how markets will grow in the future. Market Stadium also provides climate scores for every market to analyze climate risk from floods, earthquakes, wildfires, and more, so you can de-risk your investments. To learn more and supercharge your multifamily or single-family investment market analysis, book a demo at marketstadium.com. That's marketstadium.com. Let's talk specifics here. NYC's ventilation crisis. Buildings here struggle with failing bathrooms and kitchen exhaust systems, leading to compliance issues. So does Rensair help operators fix these problems?
Exhaust issues and just I would say it's a general issue across the world, just maintenance of existing hardware. in buildings. And I would say the way that we help there, specifically with issues like bathroom exhaust, et cetera, we can't really help with that. What we can do is when we implement our tech in a building, we reduce that reliance in the central system, which also extends the useful life of the central hardware, or it can postpone a necessary upgrade or replacement of that equipment. And we are working on a project with CBRE in the UK right now on actually quantifying what is the impact from, for instance, if you can reduce the fan running speed in a large air handling unit from, say, 70 to 50%, that percentage reduction matters significantly, both for the energy pool of the unit. It's non-linear, it's more exponential. So you get a very large energy decrease from doing that reduction, but it also significantly extends the life of the unit. That's where we can impact some of these maintenance issues.
As we saw in our previous episode with Lesson CRO Sean Miller, the conversation around repair versus replace. I mean, it's hard for many owners and operators to decide, right? Or to even have the right data to make a decision on whether to replace or repair. You're making it much easier because you can just extend the lifespan.
It brings up a key point, with our tech. So first of all, if you need to replace central HVAC equipment, you're typically looking at a payback period on the upgrades you do there of more than 20 years. So it's expensive to do. It's complicated to retrofit in an old building, and it has a very, very long payback. Installing Rensair, all our hardware or the whole installation is typically paid back in less than 3 years. But importantly also, any project that we do an upfront analysis of a building before we go into it. So for instance, with the senior living owner that we are working with and expanding with, one of the key propositions for them as well is prior to doing a building, we will request some base information of the building. That's mechanical drawings, list of HVAC equipment, historical utility bills, etc. And on that basis, we will run through our own in-house developed model, essentially a simulation for how much energy is currently consumed for HVAC, and how will an introduction of Rensair reduce that. We also go on site and inspect all the equipment. And oftentimes we find pretty obvious issues in the HVAC equipment that needs to be rectified in order for us to do our installation. But all of a sudden for a building owner with more than 2,000 buildings, the fact that someone goes out, inspects their equipment, notifies of any urgent maintenance that's necessary that may not have been identified, that is upgraded. And then we go in and do this implementation where they have a very good understanding of what the return profile of the investment into Rensair is upfront because of our analysis. That's a strong value proposition.
Talk a bit more about your business model and how you're structuring your partnerships.
Currently, we primarily go direct. So we work with the clients directly. We offer our solutions in two different commercial models. I mentioned our traditional CapEx model, where our tech is paid back in typically less than 3 years. That's also why, when we deliver a project to our clients, we show them upfront. Our hardware has, we say, a standard of 15-year useful life. We will show them full cash flows laid out for 15 years. We give them an IRR on the project. We show them a return on investment. And that essentially makes a very straightforward investment case for them. We're typically averaging an IRR, for instance, in senior living above 24%. So very attractive investment case. We also, for clients that don't necessarily have CapEx budgets available to upgrade their buildings, but are wanting to reduce their carbon emissions, we offer a subscription OpEx model where Rensair provides all the equipment. We essentially capture the savings from installing the solution, but the client sees the reduction in gas and electricity consumption, so they reduce their carbon emissions. We help them quantify that, and they get the air quality improvements in their buildings. And that's something, for instance, with some of the larger landlords, that's an attractive proposition. And then we are now starting to explore some various partnerships, go to market with, some of the larger facility management companies, also some of the larger consulting firms that consult on climate tech. They're looking at how they can offer our solution to their clients.
Jeff, how are these climate tech solutions attractive for venture capital investors?
It depends on the venture capital investor. I mean, for us, our model. If we can help a company get to a venture lift via our limited partnership, which owns billions and billions of square feet, it's something that we will seriously take a look at investing in, assuming the scalability isn't overly expensive, the margin profile is attractive, which is a lot of ifs, right? Like we've only done 50 some odd deals in the 15, 16 years we've been doing this. So, and this business which I did find attractive we're not investors. What I don't like about it is the hardware component, right? Like it's a box that sits in the room. Unfortunately, at the moment, that's the technology, right? And like there are people that are going to utilize that, whether it is unsightly, which is actually not a terribly unattractive box. It's got a cool look. The hardware component for us, for Camber Creek specifically, is more difficult. There are climate tech investors where that is not a gating issue at all, clearly, because Frederik has received a nice, healthy dose of venture capital investment, which is great because, I assume he and his twin brother, who don't look anything alike. It's so weird. By the way, that's a joke. They're very much identical. But you're not, right? Did you tell me you're not identical?
No, we are identical. Yeah, we used to look way more alike than we do now, but still enough to confuse people.
Oh, totally. I have no idea which one you are. You actually might not be Frederik, and we're just like, sure.
You'll never know.
We will never know. But when VCs invest in companies like Frederik's, where they're dedicating a certain amount of their resources to R&D, like what does it look like to try and miniaturize these components so it's built into the HVAC system versus having to have a standalone? I'm sure that's on the product roadmap, right?
It's a great point. That was also when you mentioned the hardware component. We were recently granted by all means, very broad patent on our approach, which we're very excited about. And that allows us to, essentially, you could think of the approach as decentralized ventilation. So we're no longer relying on central ventilation from the central system. We combine it with a localized filtration approach. And that system can either be standalone devices on the floor right now, as we're doing it, which has its own benefits in specific building types, meaning that, it's very simple to implement. We equipped 125,000 square feet, 10 floors at Salesforce in London in 5 hours, right? So there are some benefits to that right now. Now that we also have a broad patent on the approach, we are looking at how can we do a more integrated solution that can sit under the false ceilings in a space. And we also think with the IP we have, that's, for instance, something that you can partner with a more traditional HVAC player on saying, we've approached it from the chain of thought as saying, let's go out and demonstrate that there's a real demand here, the technology works. And from there, undoubtedly, this will develop significantly over the coming years in terms of making it as sleek and easily implementable and integratable in various different building types. So we are trying to identify currently the lower hanging fruit. Again, senior living is a great place to implement something like this. Also, we don't by any means say we need to be in every grade A building, but there are buildings that struggle with energy efficiency or clients that are under big pressure to reduce their emissions or energy consumption. And there, the solution we have right now is very straightforward to roll out. And over time, I'm sure there will be different forms of this that allows us to tackle more building types.
From a VC perspective, I was looking at some stats, and on average, when you have hardware component to your business, founders do tend to get more diluted than non-hardware naturally. So there's also that.
I don't think that's true in our case. I also think, right, like it's interesting, right, this space here that I think most VCs are not comfortable with hardware. And that's definitely true. There are some that are and specialize in hardware. We are well positioned in the hardware space in that we have quite healthy margins, but also I think it's our strength that we started as a hardware business and then we put software on top. I think there are many startups that start from the software position and then they realize they need some hardware, and then developing that hardware is really difficult. My brother and I are benefiting from all the hard work our father did in terms of developing a really well-functioning, high-performing product with all the certifications and validation that comes from that from healthcare. And being able to then put the software layer on top means that, again, we have Class A hardware and have then been able to develop the software component afterwards, which really has enabled what the direction the business is taking today.
Talk about AI. In your recent blog post, you mentioned how there's a revolution happening in commercial real estate with the possibility of enhancing investment strategies and operational efficiency. So talk about the Rensair cloud and leveraging AI to monitor and optimize indoor air quality.
First point that I think is key here is we have seen, I would say, pretty much a paradigm shift in how you think about indoor air quality over the last few years as a result of the emergence of low-cost sensors. So historically, the way that building ventilation guidelines and regulation was set was because, again, you couldn't measure anything. So you had to say, let's pump a lot of air through the building, and then, we presume that we'll have a healthy building. Then CO2 sensors emerged some years ago, And the concept of demand control ventilation was picked up. And that really meant that, okay, you can now start measuring how much CO2 is in the building, how many people are there, how much outside air do we need. Now, with our approach today, we can measure all air quality parameters at the same time. And that allows us to look much more holistically at air quality. And again, also, we can affect that air quality with our hardware, as I mentioned. And, these low-cost sensors that we build into our devices are very, very accurate. But, that technology didn't exist a few years ago. And that enables the whole solution. That enables how our cloud platform runs. And this is where we're really starting to utilize AI now for all the both data that we gather. We get a very detailed understanding of the use of a building based on the air quality patterns we see. So one of the simple examples is based on the CO2 levels that we measure throughout the building from each of our devices. When we know the size of a space and the amount of outside air that's being supplied to the space, we can very accurately estimate occupancy numbers. And that's now, for instance, an interesting add-on that our clients are really interested in because we produce completely anonymized data. Many struggle with the anonymity of occupancy sensors if you're scanning ID cards and whatever else. We get that data just from the CO2 levels and air quality we measure in a space. And as this data set grows, there are a number of other ways that we can utilize AI for the data analysis and learning portion and how we feed that back to how we run the building. And then the other place where we're really starting to use a lot of, I would say, AI and machine learning is being built into our approach is our building analysis tool. So it's becoming more and more advanced. We are seeing there are various different ways to set up buildings, construct buildings, and ventilate them. And we are now able to, with less and less data, get a very, very accurate estimate for how we can optimize the running of the buildings, again, just from as we continuously learn and look at more and more cases throughout.
I mean, if this isn't already happening, I'm smelling a potential tangent shidduch, Jeffrey, with measurable, because it seems like the data that Rensair is collecting could be very beneficial for the measurable platform.
I think you might be right. I don't know if Frederik knows what shidduch means.
That's what I was letting you explain.
Please do.
Shidduch is when you put two parties together and they're all like, yes, we should do something here.
We are finding with, for instance, we're doing a project with PwC in Europe right now. And we see that, they have paid significantly more for an occupancy sensor system at each desk than what our whole solution costs. And ours has a payback in, just over 2 years. And they can get similar data from there. So, the potential add-on from having that occupancy element to the solution could be, will undoubtedly be an extremely strong proposition on top of what we argue is already a very strong proposition as it relates to energy and air quality.
That's interesting because it anticipates my next question. Talk about some of the biggest mistakes owners and operators and tenants make regarding air quality and energy efficiency.
I think there is generally just a lack of information in terms of, and I think for many, it's just that it's relatively new that this data is actually as available as it is. Buildings tend to be overventilated, especially office buildings. We've seen it on the back of the pandemic, right? Like you hear of some of these standout cases where you started running 100% outside air intake during the pandemic and that was never changed back again. That's very rare that you find that. And that's something that the tenants can find out themselves or the owners can establish themselves. But when we go into a building, we do often see that there is an overventilation relative to the actual occupancy in the building. Again, that's where it's useful to have an understanding of occupancy. But then also the next step for us is with this new approach where you are measuring pollutants and showing they never exceed a specific limit. Actually, there's a different part of building regulation, both in the US and Europe, that says, okay, you no longer need to comply with X amount of outside air intake to the building. All you need to demonstrate is that these pollutant groups never exceed certain thresholds. And if you can demonstrate that, which is again what we can do with our air quality measurements, then you can abandon a framework of pulling X amount of outside air in and instead only call for outside air if you're struggling to keep those pollutants at the right levels. That's really interesting. And it's some of that learning that we are now trying to share with tenants, occupiers, and owners, et cetera, to really make sure that they are aware that this is available. Because again, there's a lot of money left on the table by buildings being run inefficiently.
This episode is brought to you in collaboration with Blueprint, the future of real estate. A few weeks ago, in September, Jeff and I participated in the largest, most global gathering of industry leaders and innovators leading the charge in changing the built environment. from construction to transaction, for 3 days of networking, learning, and ecosystem advancement in Las Vegas. With trillions of dollars of assets and the best global innovators under one roof, the future of the built world happens at Blueprint. Blueprint 2025 will take place at the Venetian Las Vegas from September 16th to 18th. Learn more and join the interest list at blueprintvegas.com. That's blueprintvegas.com. See y'all there. Denmark, your native country, is a leader in sustainability and energy efficiency. What policies or what approaches should real estate owners consider to get there?
Obviously, Denmark has, always been very, very green focused and very focused on, obviously, renewable energy has been major in Denmark, given we have one of the world's largest manufacturers of windmills, etc. But I think Denmark has very much a technology first approach and is quite open to adopting new tech. And I think that's where others can learn something from that, right? And we are seeing, I would say, not just in Denmark, but across Europe, there is a much higher political demand to implement essentially sustainability initiatives or decarbonization initiatives down at a corporate level. And all of that flows through to, your ESG reporting to be part of specific indices as a publicly traded company, et cetera. So we actually generally find around the world that dealing with publicly traded companies, that's where we get the most instant, pickup, because most of them are under some degree of pressure to deliver some results. And I think Denmark has just historically been one of the leaders there, which comes through in how everything is run there today.
It's fascinating. On one hand, Denmark, well positioned in terms of tech first mindset and also, staying at the forefront of sustainability and climate tech goals, but also because of climate change, if I'm not mistaken, and thanks to Greenland, Denmark is stand to benefit a lot from melting in the ice caps up north.
It's been interesting following, everything that's obviously happening with Greenland now. As a Dane, there's been talks for so many years of, natural resource access and everything else in Greenland. To my knowledge, every time something has been discovered, it's still been uneconomical to access just because of the difficulty of doing so.
That's because Denmark doesn't know how to do it. But once it becomes our 51st state,
Here
and
we go.
rename it,
of course,
Donald J. Trump Land, or Mag Greenland. Mag Greenland might like a big M, little A, Greenland, Mag Greenland. Yeah. No,
submit it.
You guys don't like that?
We'll let the audience decide.
We'll see what everyone decides. The one thing I would say, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's now a petition signed by 250,000 Danes to adopt California as a result of what's happening in Greenland.
Oh, so please take California. Please take California.
I would imagine that not everyone would be too upset with but I think California is pretty aligned with the Danish welfare model.
Exactly, and you guys would go bankrupt because they would take all your money and give you nothing. But what's amazing about California, and there's one other state that can do this, California can actually cede from the Union and become its own republic. It is called the California Republic. So they could put a voter initiative to cede from the Union and then confederate with Denmark, but I don't think you could. I mean, you guys have what's the tax rate there?
It's like 50%. It's like progressive tax system, but I think it peaks out at between 50 and 60 or something like that.
Okay, so it's a little bit higher in California. So yeah. you guys would love that.
Yeah, we're like perfectly aligned.
I mean, California still has, what is it, the 5th largest economy in the world? Imagine if it was better run. Then they're still producing the most innovative companies in the world. So could be worse.
Yeah, California is probably the most beautiful state in the world. Like from top to bottom, everything it has. But the people, anyhow, too.
Frederik, collaboration superpower. If you could choose one person, historic or living, to do a partnership with, who would it be?
Good question. I think going back to the roots of Rensair's background, so it's actually, and I grew up with this knowledge from my dad growing up with this, we utilize UVC light inside our Rensair units to eradicate pollutants, and it's a key part of our delivery. It's actually a Danish guy who won the Nobel Prize in 1903 for doing that, a guy called Niels Finsen. he would be an interesting man to partner with on a collaboration, because it's been so key to Rensair's success and our differentiation. The UVC we're utilizing, I think that would be a nice Danish link as well to have a meeting with him.
Wow. He was born in January 1st, 1638. Is this the same Niels Stenson?
No, Finsen. It's Finsen.
Finsen.
Yeah.
Different one. This is also a Danish scientist. Common name.
Yeah, no. I believe this guy was born on the Faroe Islands, another set of islands that are part of Denmark.
Frederik, where can Tangent listeners and real estate owners and tenants learn more about Rensair and connect with you?
They can go to rensair.com. By the way, Rens means clean in Danish, so that's where the name comes from. So it's rensair.com. Go to our website. Also, please find me on LinkedIn. The spelling of my name might be difficult given it's Danish, but it's Frederik Hendriksen. And yeah, please reach out. Love to talk to anyone.
Frederik Hendriksen, co-founder of Rensair, cutting carbon, costs, and pollutants with the world's first certified air quality ecosystem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frederik.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review Tangent, and share the show with a friend. This episode is produced by me, Edward Cohen. Thanks for listening to Tangent PropTech, and remember, collaboration is our superpower. So stay curious and always be learning.